Well, thanks everybody for joining us tonight. It is about 5 after 7, and I do suspect this is going to go probably less than an hour. That's our goal. When a couple of weeks ago, I was talking with Sarah and Liz and Samantha in our office, and it just occurred to me that there are times when, frankly, there's so much going on at United Way that even the three of us, the four of us, we don't know what each other is doing. And if Samantha doesn't know what Liz is doing and Liz doesn't know what Sarah's doing, it's pretty unlikely that any single volunteer with United Way is going to have equally that big picture. And so we started talking and had a dialogue about, the importance of those people who are involved with United Way as a volunteer really have the opportunity to learn a little bit more about us as an organization. And so we've never done this before. This is not an official orientation, if you will. I'll use air quotes, orientation. It's not meant to be United Way 101. It's really just meant to give you a kind of a snapshot, a glimpse into the bigger picture of what United Way of Greater Nashua does. And many of you, in fact, I would dare say all of you, are volunteers or otherwise involved with United Way in one way or another, but some in very specific ways that others don't even know what you do. So hopefully in the course of the next hour or so, we'll get a chance to kind of touch on a little bit of everything we do as an organization. I do want to make sure that people know that throughout this meeting that please use the chat feature to ask questions or throw in comments, and then along the way, Liz and Samantha and Sarah and myself will answer. And then some of you also, I can see, are much more engaged in the United Way as volunteers and have a deeper perspective, like Bob Mack or Peter. You guys know a lot more about what we do, so you can certainly chime in with your perspectives as well. So with that, I wanted to start out just talking a little bit, kind of think of this as sort of an inverted pyramid. We're going to start very, very big and then drill down to some very specific topics. So really starting at the very, very highest possible level, what is United Way and what is the United Way of Greater Nashua? United Way is what they call an affiliate organization. There are over 1,000 United Ways in the country, and it's actually a global organization that goes beyond the borders of the United States. It goes back and forth, depending upon how you measure it, with a couple of investment firms as the largest non-governmental organization in the world. Other than, say, UNICEF, it's the largest nonprofit in the world in terms of the amount of resources that are managed and deployed in service of humanity, if you will. But in the United States, we belong to an organization called United Way Worldwide. We are essentially a franchise. So if you are familiar with other business franchises, like say, I don't know, Taco Bell. Taco Bell's a franchise. We're not Taco Bell, but Taco Bell's a franchise. Some Taco Bells are owned by the corporate store, and some are owned have a local owner. And in the case of United Way, we're all locally owned and operated. And so when you hear that phrase, locally owned and operated, you're absolutely talking about United Way. Each United Way has a defined territory that it serves. So there are 4 United Ways in the state of New Hampshire. There's United Way of Greater Nashua, of course, serving the southern tier of the state. We serve 11 communities. Those are the communities of Nashua, Merrimack, Hudson, and Milford, as well as smaller towns interspersed throughout, including Litchfield, Amherst, Hollis, Brookline, Wilton, Mount Vernon, the entire Sohegan Valley region. So those are our 11 communities. That roughly overlaps with what they call the Greater Nashua Public Health Region. The Greater Nashua Public Health Region also includes Pelham and Windham, so that's 13 communities. But generally speaking, when you talk about Greater Nashua, that's what you're talking about, is those 11 communities. Other United Ways in the state include Granite United Way, is the largest United Way in the state. Essentially, Granite United Way is everything from Bedford north to the Canadian border, including up through the the Merrimack Valley into Lebanon and over to Vermont. Then to the west of us is Monadnock United Way, centered in Keene. They serve the entire Monadnock region, which is a very large region, less populous, so a very different kind of a dynamic than our region, which is much more densely populated. And then to the east of us on the Seacoast region is what's called Seacoast United Way. And Seacoast United Way, for the last decade or so, has been part of the United Way of Massachusetts Bay and Merrimack Valley, which is, in United Way terms, that actually just means Boston. They've been part of the Boston United Way, but they're actually moving and merging with Granite United Way. So they'll be part of that larger Granite United Way footprint. So that's how United Way in the state is broken up. Each of us we work together as partners. We collaborate when it makes sense to do certain things. For example, statewide advocacy. Oftentimes there will become issues before the State House that we all agree are important. For example, in the realm of homelessness or in the realm of early childhood education, in various health initiatives, we all tend to have a lot of common ground, and so we'll try to speak with one voice at the State House. And then there are other initiatives that are like 211, which is a program that many of you are familiar with, that is run by Granite United Way, and that's the state's referral resource database. So when we say, if you know somebody who's struggling with an issue and needs resources, we'll always try and say, this is who we know locally, but you also should call 211. And we also help pay for 211. So we all collaborate on that as well. So that's a little bit about sort of the big picture of United Way, and then the littler picture of Granite United Way, of Greater Nashua United Way, pardon me. We've been around since 1930. Our United Way organization was founded in the Great Depression. We were founded after the Crown Hill Fire, which was a massive fire that burned down a large portion of the city of Nashua. And so in response to that disaster, in light of the fact that it was the Great Depression, community leaders came together and founded what they called the Community Chest of Greater Nashua. And of course, those of you who play Monopoly are familiar with the term community chest. And during that time in the 30s, there were community chests popping up all around the country. And of course, Parker Brothers got a hold of that idea and named community chest and trademarked it on their Monopoly board. But United Way is what actually inspired the community chest to pop up. And the idea was essentially that in times of great difficulty, people with resources could come together and pool their resources in support of the greater good and create a pooled fund for all to be supported by. And that was the start of our United Way. So move forward several decades, and we evolved and became United Way. We all sort of started to merge under that umbrella organization. And we sort of determined over time that there were really three areas to focus on. Three areas that we could all agree are important to every United Way in the country. And that's focusing on health, education, and economic mobility. These are and my colleague Liz will be talking a little bit about community impact. These are the areas that we would call the building blocks of a good life. Access to health, education, and economic mobility are the building blocks of a good life. And those are the areas that we choose to invest our time and effort and resources in. A couple of things I want to mention beyond that is that we have sort of what we would call our traditional process at United Way, which is something we're going to talk to a bit in a moment, called community assessment and community investment. Those are core elements of what United Way does. And those are core elements that most United Ways also do. However, beyond that, it's really important to understand that every United Way is truly independent of every other United Way. So our local board of directors is independent. We don't report to any other United Way organization. The decisions we make about our local community reflect the needs of our local community. And that's a critical underpinning of United Way philosophically, because if you think about it, the needs in Detroit or Lansing or Los Angeles or Keene are very different than the needs of the community in Greater Nashua. Yes, we all have to focus on health, education, and economic mobility, but what that means here is going to be something slightly different and reflects our community. So again, I'm watching, like I say, I'm watching the chat, and just so you know, feel free to use it if you do have any questions or comments along the way. I would just remind people of that. Things I want to talk about tonight, just so you kind of have a sense of where we're going. There's a lot to cover here. We're going to talk about a couple of key areas: our organizational structure at United Way, and why that's important as a volunteer to understand where each of you might fit into the overall organization. We're going to talk about areas including community investment and community assessment that I just mentioned. We're going to talk at length about volunteer engagement. We're going to talk about the area of resource development and fundraising and raising money in order to support our community. We're going to talk about the differentiation between restricted and unrestricted funds and why that's important. So you'll know a little bit about that. We're going to talk about some of the areas that we have worked in recent years to develop restricted funds to support the community, in particular around youth homelessness. We are going to talk about coalitions and our role in the community in being a convener of conversations. We are going to talk about our COVID response, and we are going to talk about annual events. And if that doesn't tire you and exhaust you, I'm exhausted just going over the list. So before going any further, I'd like to introduce my friends and colleagues who are going to be talking here for a moment. Liz Fitzgerald. Liz, wave your hand. Just, hey, hi, that's Liz. Liz is my colleague, and her title is Director of Community Impacts. When I first started at United Way, Liz was my only colleague. So besides everything else, she also trained me and taught me everything I know, which is good. Without Liz, I could not have done anything at United Way, and I am deeply and eternally appreciative for that. Community impact means really Liz is the one who partners with agencies and initiatives in the community to make sure that the work we're doing is relevant, measurable, impactful, and addresses the needs of our community. And then we have my colleague, Sarah. Sarah, where are you? Sarah Wade. Hello, Sarah. I suspect probably most of you, I know, probably your first interaction with United Way might have been with Sarah. And Sarah is our Director of Volunteer Engagement. Her job is to take the crazy ideas that Liz and Samantha and I come up with and to go out into the community and engage volunteers to help support those ideas. And what I will say about Sarah is I think deep down she probably realizes that I'm a crazy person, but she always says, that's an amazing idea, and she goes and gets volunteers to support it. So Sarah's, for our volunteers, the face of the community. And then we have my colleague Samantha. Samantha, raise your hand and give a wave. Samantha Casista she's the new person on the block. Samantha's been here with us for just a little over a year. She actually started with us as a volunteer, working at one of our pop-up food pantries. Samantha and I go way back, knowing each other from the Chamber of Commerce. And Samantha's job is very different than Sarah's and Liz's in terms of her job is raising money. So she goes out into the community and works mostly with companies and develops partnerships with those companies and also individuals and also foundations to bring resources to our organization, financial resources that we otherwise would not have had previously. Now, there's a question from Paula before I go any further. Paula in the chat says, when you were talking about size of the various United Ways, did you mean operating budget? So, yeah. So when I say size of United Way, collectively, United Way is, and I don't know what the number is for 2020 and 2021 because the pandemic has, sort of skewed a lot of the numbers. But last I checked, United Way is somewhere in the $6 to $7 billion range as an overall organization. That means our operating budget plus the operating budget of the thousands of other United Ways taken collectively. That does not mean that United Way of Greater Nashua is a $7 billion organization. We are not. I will tell you that. We are somewhere in the neighborhood of a $2 million organization, taking all of our work into account. I hope that answers your question, Paula.
Thank you.
Yes, of course. And thank you for asking the question. And Juan, thank you for your comment. Amazing. Juan is a great volunteer, so I appreciate that. So before I turn it over to, I think, Liz next, I want to talk a little bit about just the organizational structure of the United Way of Greater Nashua. About 2 years ago, maybe 3, we did some soul searching and looked at our organizational structure. We had your traditional board of directors, and then our board of directors had what we called an executive committee. And then there were a number of other committees that kind of fed into the organizational structure. And what we started to realize was that our board of directors wasn't really serving the most important purpose that for us a board of directors can serve. And that's to bring to our organization the voice of the community, to inform our work by representing diverse perspectives so that we can know as an organization that the direction we're going in represents the needs of the community, and also so that the members of that board can become advocates for the work that we do at United Way. So it was kind of becoming a little bit more like they were getting involved with things that weren't necessarily meeting that mission of informing our work. They were involved more in sort of the running of the organization. And what we determined, what we really needed was to split that off and create what we call an advisory council. And so the advisory council is a large group. I think in terms of Venn diagrams and bubbles sometimes. That's sort of the way my mind works. Some people think linear, I think in bubbles. So we have this organizational bubble called the Community Advisory Council. And that right now is about 25 members. Now, a smaller subset of that advisory council is called our governance board. Every member of our governance board is a member by definition of our advisory council, but they have a subset of responsibilities, and those are the governance, the running of the organization. So on our governance board, we have 2 members with us tonight. We have Bob Mack, who's our current governance board chair, and we have Peter Schalliner, who's our current finance committee chair. This is about getting to the end of Bob's tenure in that role. December 31st is Bob's last day in that job, and he's going to be replaced by Dan Monroe, who's our current treasurer, will become the new governance chair, and Peter, who chairs our finance committee, will become the new treasurer. Bob will still be part of the governance board, but as importantly, Bob's role will also to bring his voice to our advisory council. And that's perhaps even a more important perspective. The advisory council never does things like looking at the financials, looking into the policies and procedures of running the organization, writing my review. All of those things that are basically the running of the organization are managed by the governance board. And that gives the advisory council a much bigger voice at the table because they have much more time to actually raise their voice at our meetings in terms of needs. And at the same time as doing that, we've tried very hard to make our advisory council more diverse and more representative of the communities we serve. So beyond that, we have a whole bunch of committees that help run the organization. This is all volunteer-based. So we have, and so I see Juan with us. Juan, I believe, is on our marketing committee. That's one of our committees. The marketing committee is in the governance committee. We decided a long time ago that when it comes to marketing, we can do a lot of what we want to do through volunteers. And we've had really good success with that. So we have our marketing committee. We also have our resource development committee. Oh, Paula, I totally forgot to mention Paula. Paula is a member of our governance board. She chairs our resource development committee. That was embarrassing. Sorry about that, Paula. And resource development is a fancy schmancy way of saying raising money. And so Paula is the face to the organization for that. We also have our finance committee that I mentioned that Peter is part of. We have a smaller policy committee that is chaired by Rolf Goodwin, who's one of the attorneys on our board. We also have an advocacy committee. That's a relatively new committee. If any of you are interested ever in sort of what voice do we bring to the creation of policy at the local and the state level, that's where the advocacy committee gets involved. And then we have our community events committee, and that's a committee that gets involved with the planning and execution of a lot of our events throughout the year. So those are really what we do on a regular basis. On a not as regular basis, we have, but equally as important, just not all the time, we have our community investment committee and our community assessment committee. And that's where Liz gets involved. And Liz is not the chair of those committees, because Liz is a professional staffer, but Liz is the person who works with the volunteers who gets a lot of the work done. So Liz, I'm going to turn it to you, and I'm hoping you can just give a little bit of an overview of what community assessment is about and what community investment is about.
Happy to do that, Mike. So community assessment is just exactly what it sounds. We have a committee of people who periodically look at a lot of data from a lot of data sources to figure out specifically for our 11 towns what the greatest needs are. You know, we look at data from the census, we look at data from public health, we get data from the hospitals. New Hampshire Regional Planning puts together data. We look at labor statistics. Anything that goes into those three things that Mike mentioned are the core building blocks of a good quality of life for any person in any community: health, education, financial stability. We look at data that feeds into that so that we know for our local community what's going on, what the trends are, where there are gaps, and where we could, as United Way and as a community, make an important difference or have an impact. So we look at that data just before we do our investment process so that the data is fresh and it's sort of aligned in our cycle, kind of to match when the census data is available and when the sort of mini censuses in between the 10-year census. They call it the American Community Survey, put out different data. So we pull that together into a very high-level report, and then we go out to our community members, because knowing what the needs are is one thing. You could justify almost anything as important and valuable to do, but we also want to know, you know, what people are most worried about and what people are really excited about doing something. So if there's some momentum to move something forward, we also want to know, like, you know, how our community members feel, how you all feel. So your input, we'll be looking for your input when we start to do our assessment process. And we put that into a report that says basically what are the strengths of our community, what are the challenges of our community, what are things that are like strengths now but maybe going in a wrong direction, and we take that data and then apply it to our strategic framework: health, education, economic mobility, and we put out a request for proposals. So every year the board, the governance board, probably informed by the Community Advisory Council, sets aside a pool of money to invest in community programs and services that are going to address those needs that we've identified in the needs assessment. So once we've figured out what those needs are, we put out an ask to local service providers to say, hey, what programs are you doing that are addressing these needs? And write a proposal to us, and we'll decide if we have money to give you and if that is a really, you know, aligned with what we want to invest in, and if we think that program will have powerful impact. And so, like Mike said, I don't get to decide. The board doesn't really get to decide. The board approves. Who decides is a group of community volunteers who are from our donor base that represent all walks of life in our community. They volunteer to review the proposals from the agencies. We ask for a fair amount of information about the program. What's it going to do? What's the goal of this program? What impact will it have, and who will it serve? So that we make sure that we're investing in programs that serve the whole community and meet the needs. And then that money is proposed by our volunteer panels. We call them panels. So there's 3 of them. There's one for health, there's one for education, there's one for economic, and we call it economic mobility or financial stability. Programs that have to do with jobs and housing and any sort of financial assistance that helps people get out of or bridge out of poverty. So once the agencies submit the proposals, we duke it out in the boardroom to figure out what the best investment is going to be. Usually we have less money than we have needs and proposals, but we do the best we can to align the dollars that we have with programs that will make the most sense. And then once we award that funding, it's every 3 years. So an agency will get an annual grant. And as long as they keep meeting their measurable outcomes or meeting the measures that they've set for the program and things are going well, they'll as much as we can promise, as long we can't give the money if we don't raise the money, but we commit to those programs and services for the next 3 years so they don't have to apply again. They continue to work on that program for the next 3 years. So that's pretty much how assessment and investment works. I'd like to talk about collaboration a little bit, but I don't know if that's the time in this program now.
Yeah, let's come back to that in a couple minutes.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great, Liz. Thank you so much. So the work that Liz does in this area of assessment and investment, community needs assessment, community investment is probably, I would say it's probably the most technical part of the work at United Way. It's also a really unique area of volunteering that only comes around every couple of years. And I would encourage any of you as we start to get towards looking at this process that will take place over the next 12 months. It would be fabulous to see some of you who've been involved in volunteering in many different aspects and facets of what we do to get involved with this. In order to help explain this process a little bit, a couple of years ago, we put together a short video with a guy named Fred. And I wanted to share that video with you now so you can kind of get reinforced about a little bit of reinforcement about what the community needs assessment and investment process is about. So that's a little bit the traditional United Way. When people asked me, if people asked me 3 or 4 years ago, what does United Way do? My answer would have been probably a whole heck of a lot of what we just described. And, and then we decided, well, let's throw in a pandemic and see how that changes things up a little bit. And so what I want to do actually is transition a little bit here to Sarah, my colleague Sarah, and talk about volunteering and how our community response has changed over the past couple of years to include not just our community needs and community assessment volunteers and our traditional board and marketing volunteers and events volunteers, but beyond that, what are all the areas in which we get involved? And so I'm going to turn it over to you, Sarah. And while you're doing that, just as a backdrop, I'm going to put our COVID infographic up on the screen for people just to reflect upon what we've been doing for the past 18 months. So Sarah, go ahead. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Yeah, so like Mike was saying, prior to COVID, we had been working on a lot of projects, but they were vastly different than what we've been working on since COVID began. Prior to COVID, we were focusing a lot on fundraising events where we needed a lot of volunteers over the edge, and which was the rappelling fundraiser or skydiving fundraiser and things like that. After COVID started, we started doing a lot more direct action things. For instance, when COVID started, we saw a real need related to school lunches. Kids weren't going to school, so they couldn't get the free school lunches. So we found a way for volunteers to help make those available. We had volunteers handing out the school lunches at schools. Volunteers were riding school buses to deliver those school lunches. So we were jumping in, doing a lot of different things like that as we saw needs arise. We had volunteers going out doing grocery shopping for homebound people who were kind of reticent to go out because of COVID, because they were immunocompromised, or people who had COVID and needed to stay home. So we had a lot of volunteers going out doing grocery shopping. And then masks became kind of a scarcity. So we were able to get masks, and we had volunteers distributing masks to people within the community at our local malls. They were downtown and various other places. So we spent a lot of time out in the community making sure everybody had masks. Around that same time, we saw that people were not having access to fresh fruits and vegetables or the food that they really needed because they were, unemployed or not working as much as they had been in the past. So we developed pop-up pantries, which are still going on right now. So we were handing out food at, I think, 10 different locations per week to start out with. We kind of transitioned to a few more. And that's been going on ever since. We have volunteers out in the community every weekday handing out free fruits and vegetables to people in various neighborhoods in the community. And another thing that we started doing during COVID was related to educational supports. We started a program called Learn United, where we offer free tutoring to kids. That's very volunteer based. Last year we tutored around 50 kids at various locations around Nashua, as well as online. We also collected school supplies. Last year and this year, we've collected school supplies, and we have started a school supply pantry in the lower level of United Way to make school supplies available to teachers. So teachers can come in pretty much any time when we're open and pick out whatever school supplies they need. So we're constantly doing drives for school supplies, and we're constantly handing out school supplies to teachers. Another thing, at the beginning of COVID, a lot of kids were doing online learning. Most kids were doing online learning. Some of the kids were trying to learn using their telephones, which is not ideal. So we collected laptops and other types of electronic devices to try to get those out to the kids that needed them. So we had volunteers refurbishing those computers too. So that was a lot of the COVID response that we were doing at the beginning of COVID. Another thing that we were doing was we got a lot of sanitizer. So we get large amounts of sanitizer that were not in containers that were small enough for household use. So we had volunteers rebottling that sanitizer also. So there were a lot of various little things that our volunteers were doing. And then we were doing food drives as well, which we're still doing. So we did some large scale food drives in response to COVID to make sure that the food pantries were supplied with enough food for people to take home with them. So we did some large scale food drives during the beginning of COVID. And we saw that they were working really effectively. So we continued to do food drives on the first and third Saturday of every month at the local Hannafords. So our volunteers are really, really effective at that. People love that. We have a wide variety of volunteers, volunteer backgrounds at that also. We have a lot of high school students that do that, and we have retired people that do that too. And kids love it. Kids are really effective at that. And then we do a lot of other things too. That are kind of more small scale. Recently, you may have seen a call for volunteers to write thank you cards to healthcare workers. So we do that too. And we did that around this time last year in kind of conjunction with the holidays. This year, we also saw a need for a thank you to our healthcare workers. So we have volunteers doing that too. And then we have volunteers that have kind of more specific skills. Or who have trucks. So we have volunteers who volunteered their trucks to help us move things around the community. So we had volunteers moving food. We had volunteers, we purchased some large freezers for some of the other organizations in Nashua. So we had volunteers moving freezers. We had volunteers moving a huge donation of Chromebooks that we received recently. So volunteers with trucks. And then we had volunteers putting together what we called grab and go carts, which were carts to distribute free lunches at schools. So we sent volunteers out to our local schools to actually do some construction and assembly of these carts. And then we recently got a donation of 1.5 million face masks. So we had volunteers handing out the face masks. So we have done lots and lots of different types of projects in response to COVID, in addition to a lot of the events which we continued to do during COVID as well. Our large scale events, fundraisers, and also our community baby shower and other things like that. Last year we also did a shoebox project for seniors, which we'll be doing again this year. So we had volunteers doing more direct action type things as well. So we're very, very busy in the community. And a lot of what we do, we post on this site that Mike just pulled up, volunteergreaternashua.org. Volunteergreaternashua.org, we call it a web portal. So people can log on and search for volunteer opportunities in their own community in Nashua, but we're connected with United Ways around the state. So the volunteer opportunities from Volunteer New Hampshire, which is run by Granite United Way, and then the United Way, the Seacoast area, and Monadnock United Way. They all pop up on our site. So you can, through this site, you can see pretty much all of the volunteers available in New Hampshire. So it's a really great site. Like I said, we post there, and then we encourage other nonprofits in the Nashua area to post there as well. So you can search by town, you can search by zip code, and then you can also search by the type of volunteer opportunity you're looking for. So it's a great site. We love it. A lot of you are probably on it already. It could be how you found us, or it could be how you sign up for our various things that we send out to you. So it's a great site, and it's a great way that we connect to the community. So I think, Mike, that's all I have to say regarding volunteers. So I'll pass it back over to you.
Thank you, Sarah. So I'm always amazed that I asked Sarah, "How's it going?" And her answer is always like, "Yeah, just doing a little of this, doing a little of that." And then I'm like, "What is the little bit of this and the little bit of that you're doing?" And you look underneath the hood, and it's a whole lot of this and a whole lot of that. So it's quite remarkable, and I want to say thank you. One of the things that I think as an organization, we've really developed a capacity as in our community is to be sort of the go-to resource for getting volunteers when volunteers are needed. That we saw during the pandemic in a number of cases where we were asked by organizations that were just struggling to get volunteers on their own. They didn't have the ability, the capacity to do that, but they needed to get work done. So the Salvation Army is a good example where we actually sat down with them and said, well, what do you actually need for volunteers? And we recruited a team of volunteers that were specifically, they started as United Way COVID response volunteers. And then over time, we transitioned them over to becoming Salvation Army volunteers. And we felt like that was a really appropriate way to address a specific need. In other cases, we have organizations like the school district, or even within the past 2 weeks, we had Southern New Hampshire Medical Center come to us and ask if we could help recruit a team of volunteers to support them in their COVID vaccination efforts internally for their staff as they continue to roll things out. And within a matter of days, we were able to recruit over 20 volunteers to fill specific spots supporting vaccine clinics internally at the hospital. So this is a big part of what we've done. If you asked, as I said, 3 years ago, what do we do? None of that would have been part of my answer. And now it's a big part of the answer. So thank you, Sarah. It's great work. I wanted to give Samantha just a couple of moments to talk. And one of the things that was addressed in that video, that Fred video, was this idea of giving through the workplace. That was part of the way the video starts out, where employees join with other employees and they give financially through their paycheck on a periodic basis. That's what we call the workplace campaign. And for sure, if you go back 7, 8, 10 years ago, that was the absolute bread and butter of how revenues were brought into our United Way organization and most United Way organizations. That has transitioned over time. And while it's still very important, and we do work with a lot of employees, for example, today I was on the phone with Comcast, and they have a big workplace campaign that they're kicking off that we're part of, that employees are encouraged to give a piece of their paycheck through their payroll, because it's an easy way to donate over time, small amounts that add up to big amounts. Over time, that's become much less of the overall revenue picture. And that's where Sam starts to kind of fit into the picture here. Is her role is to go out and develop partnerships with small, medium, and large size employers, businesses, as well as individuals and foundations, to cultivate new resources and bring those into the community, into our community impact fund in a way that allows us to continue doing all of that grant making. So Sam, I'd like to maybe give you just a couple minutes to talk about what you do and how you're approaching things.
Thank you so much. The pithy way of saying it is I raise the money so that Liz can spend it. That was her expression. I think it's very funny. Basically, yeah, I create relationships. I try and create relationships with businesses that want to do good, that they didn't get into business to try and make the education better in their community. They got in business because they had a product they wanted to sell, or they wanted to work with a certain group of people. But along with that, they want to do good. So they can consider us almost like outsourcing some of their community engagement. It can also be really beneficial because it can encourage a greater sense of employee camaraderie and a sense of appreciation for one's workplace. So working with businesses to create programs that they're proud of or be a part of programs that we already have established is a wonderful part of my role. I also like to encourage ways for people like the I think it said bake sales in the Fred video, ways that people can take their talents and maybe do something good and just learn a new skill for themselves. I know of some people who do just the raking of leaves for other people, and instead of asking for money, they say donate to this organization or that organization. And just thinking dynamically of the ways in which we can try and do good for our neighbors and our friends and have it mean even more than just having a little extra money to spend at the holidays. And so Paula is one of the key people for thinking creatively on how we can fundraise for this organization and share the message of how when we work with other individuals to create good ramifications for our neighbors, the benefit that we get. That's one of the things that I like so much, is the psychological benefit that we as individuals get when we're working for the betterment of our community. So it's really easy to sell this product to businesses and foundations and individuals, because I'm really just asking them to give themselves something to be proud of, and a community that's healthier, and a sense of satisfaction at the end of the day beyond just what they create.
Well, that was succinct.
You already said half of what I do.
Well, not really. Samantha, thank you. Samantha is our newest. You started about a year ago, right? And right in the middle of the pandemic, and it's been a great fit as well. So I guess if you ever see Samantha knocking on your door, you're going to know it's because she's asking if you know a company or can help with an introduction, or in some other way support our fundraising efforts to get involved. So thank you, Sam. So a couple of things I wanted to talk about real briefly, and then I'm going to give it back to Liz to talk about some of our coalition work, our community collaborations. There is a part of what Samantha, when we talk generally about the kinds of fundraising that Samantha is tasked with, it's generally fundraising for what we call unrestricted funds. Unrestricted funds are the dollars that come with no strings attached. Those are dollars when a donor writes a check and they just say, use it for what you need to use it for, because I trust United Way to do a good job in my community. There are also restricted dollars that we receive, and that includes, for example, federal grants, but it also includes donations when donors say, we want you to use our money for something very specific. And in the past 2 years, we've developed two brand new restricted funds that I wanted to make sure that everybody kind of was aware of. We developed a general youth homelessness fund, and the way we fundraise for the Youth Homelessness Fund is actually through our skydiving event. So and so that's the only event that we have that really the money we raise goes to a specific thing, and we've committed not to spend it on anything else. That fund is in response to a need where in our community, most of the homelessness funds are really derived from grants. They're derived from federal grants, so they're very inflexible. Which means that if a young person comes along and perhaps needs to buy a pair of work boots for their first job with a construction company, or if they don't have the money to pay to get a driver's license, or some other kind of specific need like that a young person might have when they're getting started, this fund is there to pay for those types of expenses, and has been tapped into a whole bunch of times. Typically, the requests to use that fund come from our school youth homeless liaisons. Each school district has a liaison called a McKinney-Vento liaison. It's part of our guidance counseling team, and they are tasked with knowing who the homeless youth are in a community and identifying the resources for them. So that's one fund that we developed. So when you see us skydiving in the spring, you'll know what that's all about. The other is we developed a scholarship fund. That was actually developed about a year and a half ago after the passing of one of our long-term board members, Kevin Slattery, who was a great United Way board member, who over the years developed a real passion for the fight to end homelessness. And when he died, one of our other board members suggested, what if we develop a scholarship fund in Kevin's name? And we said, that's a good idea, but not just any old scholarship. Let's develop a scholarship to specifically support homeless youth. And that's where the Slattery Ending Youth Homelessness Scholarship Fund came about. Those funds are also restricted, meaning that the only people who can receive that funding are people who are up through the age of 24 pursuing their education. But we don't restrict it as other scholarships just pay for like tuition, room, and board. We look at it much more loosely, so that it could be transportation that a student needs to get to school. It could be that their tuition is paid for through, maybe through grants or scholarships otherwise, but they're struggling with paying for food and housing. And we consider that a scholarship in this case is to keep a student in school to break out of the cycle of poverty. So those are restricted. We only have about 5-6 minutes left, so I didn't want to not let Liz have the opportunity to talk just a moment about our coalition work. And there's a lot of other stuff we could talk about tonight, and probably at some point in the future we will. I want to talk about our coalition work, and then I have another short video to show you, and we'll wrap up the evening. So Liz?
Sure. So when we were talking about the needs assessment, that happens every 3 years, but you need to know that we're constantly working on pulling community members together to look at issues, things that are coming down the pike, things that we're concerned about, things that we don't feel like have enough passion and expertise wrapped around them that we could maybe bring some people together. So when we do that, we convene the community, we pull together stakeholders from all walks of life in our community and have a conversation. And that sometimes that results in just a series of conversations, or sometimes it results in a new entity like a coalition. We started that. Christina Cruz, you'll see, is on the call today. She's the director of the Prevention Coalition. That was something that was started by my predecessor several years ago around substance abuse and the opioid crisis, and they pulled people together and then received federal grant money from the Drug-Free Communities grant, I think, to support that coalition work. And that's under United Way's umbrella, but it exists as its own thing with its own steering committee, with its own drive specifically around that topic. Jocelyn Kuczynski is also on the call today. She's the director of our Early Childhood Coalition. That is a group of people around early childhood success, families, and preschool, and ready for kindergarten, and babies and maternal health. All of that goes into the coalition work. There's a lot of folks that are passionate and have expertise that are sitting around that table, but we worked as a community of stakeholders in order to bring funds into the community through the preschool development grant. And that was the work of that coalition under the umbrella of United Way, but its own separate board. And the third one I wanted to mention was our One Greater Nashua Coalition, which started at the invitation of Welcoming New Hampshire around the idea of how communities are strengthened by the diversity within the community. So we started working with stakeholders in our community, institutions like the library and the hospitals and the municipality and United Way and the chambers, but also ethnic community leaders. United Way is a lot more diverse than some of us realized back in the day, and we wanted to make sure that all voices were being heard and all community leaders had an opportunity to lead and serve and strengthen our reach into the community of people who may not speak English as a first language, may not be familiar with culture of Nashua. So we do welcoming. We have welcoming events weekly in the library, and we worked on specific goals to help our key institutions in the community be more welcoming and incorporate principles of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So that happens regularly. We have a forum. It's called the Community Connections Forum. You can find it on Facebook. And once a quarter, we host a dialogue around a specific theme topic and bring statewide experts and local experts to stimulate conversation so that we're always kind of keeping a pulse of what issues are coming up and what's happening. And you know, sometimes it might be someone from the Bureau of Label Statistics that might have the pressing idea, but it also might be a mom in the Ledge Street School that brings a pressing idea to that conversation. So I encourage you to join those. The next one is tomorrow? No, the 10th, whenever the 10th is.
Wednesday.
This Wednesday. I forgot what today was. So on the 10th from 1 to 3, anyone can participate. And the topic this quarter is the economy and financial stability. So that's really all I wanted to say about coalitions, is kind of the ongoing work of needs assessment and then helping groups who are passionate about a specific topic move that topic forward.
Thank you, Liz. That's really good. That coalition work is really important, and what we try to think of as United Way is sort of a convening table. We try and spread a big table where people can come together with diverse perspectives and move the community forward. That approach is what in the social services world is called collective impact, and it's really kind of the core of how we believe the community work should take place. Is that no single organization is big enough, smart enough, has the resources to solve all of the world's problems. So, but we do know that by coming together and bringing people together, that we can solve a lot of really difficult problems. And that's what our coalition work is about. I did want to mention, we do a lot of events throughout the year. Some of you have been to a bunch of them. Some of those events are for fundraising, and it's important to understand that even if you're an event that just feels like it's a fun event that's for fundraising, that there's an important reason why you're there, and it's to support all of this work we're talking about. So even something as seemingly trivial as coming to an event to play cornhole or going to an event to participate in a run, those are events which help us to raise money to do this work. Throughout the year, you're going to hear us talking about our skydiving event, our upcoming running event, the Nashua Nor'easter, our Over the Edge rappelling event, and our sleep out, which is this week. We also have our Day of Caring events. Each of these is not a fundraiser. It actually is a fund spender, which is great because it gives us the opportunity to bring volunteers together to do something specific and good in the community, whether it be putting food on pantries, shelves, or whether it be getting resources into the hands of families that are expecting a young child for the first time, or perhaps it be connecting seniors who are homebound to resources through our Shoebox project. So please consider getting involved in any and all of those. There's certainly plenty of opportunity to do that, and I'm sure that Sarah will make sure you're all aware of that. So I'm going to round out the evening with just one final little video, which is less than a minute, and it actually just kind of reinforces a little bit about what we think United Way is all about in terms of supporting health, education, and economic mobility in our community. And then I'll stop recording, and anybody who wants to stay around is welcome to ask questions. I'll stay as long as you want. Let me put that on, and then we'll call it an evening.
Since 1930, United Way of Greater Nashua has been your trusted partner to fight for the health, education, and financial stability of every person in every community. When a low-income child needs access to dental care, or parents need quality after-school programs where their kids can learn and be safe, United Way is there. When a person with disabilities needs a supportive day program where they can thrive, or a family loses its home and needs a place to regain financial stability, United Way is there. When a homebound senior needs food and supportive social connections, or when it comes time to die with dignity, United Way is there. The programs supported by your United Way are the heart and soul of Greater Nashua. When you volunteer or donate to United Way, you lift up the community where you live and you work. As a highly regarded nonprofit with Charity Navigator and GuideStar, you can be sure that your donations will be used for the work of making Greater Nashua stronger, smarter, and safer. Learn more and connect with us at unitedwaynashua.org.
course, I like that video because I like the guy with the voice. I think he's got a great voice for a video. Joking aside, I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to stop recording. And I wanted to thank everybody for joining us this evening, spending a little bit of time with us. It is a late night. And I do hope that you got something out of that. And we are just so grateful for your participation in United Way and your willingness to help our community to be stronger, smarter, safer, healthier, and happier, and doing that by participating in our organization. So thank you very much.